Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we're back for another episode of Libertarian Censored Podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. First, we have Trump admin says it's escalating review of Mark Kelly to an official investigation from Axios.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, "Now they are threatening everything I fought and served for across 25 years in the U.S. Navy, all because I repeated something every service member is taught." I guess that was a quote of Kelly from the article. And yeah, personally, I don't really care that they're going after Mark Kelly, but Reddit only doesn't care because Mark only cares because Mark Kelly has a D next to his name. When the Biden administration went after Donald Trump, Reddit thought it was the greatest thing ever, but now that the shoe's on the other foot, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever, and just goes to show you that Reddit really has no values other than in-group good, out-group bad, and that's very much how a lot of people think. They don't really have consistent values, they only have teams, and this is a good example of that, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have America's Useful Idiots. The left calls for revolution as the ultimate virtual signal from thehill.com, posted by Socialists Are Morons, and they added, "Goddamn morons." And yeah, personally, I would agree with that. A lot of the left says they want a revolution, but they'd be the first ones on the chopping block if that revolution ever came out. They call for revolution, but in reality, they're not that strong people. They're well-off champagne socialists who would be some of the ones to suffer the most under actual socialism. But of course, Reddit, that's why it's a good reason that seems to make up the bulk of Reddit, and that's why it's a good reason you shouldn't take Reddit seriously. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump designates street fentanyl as weapon of mass destruction, escalating militarization of drug war, posted from NPR.org, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's cross-post from the NPR subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for fentanyl. I think, fentanyl does kill a lot of people, but that being said, I don't really care for the drug war, and I know the last time the U.S. government was pushing WMDs, it resulted in the invasion of Iraq, which led to countless deaths and pretty much the downfall of the Republican Party for many years. But Reddit, of course, and yeah, it's definitely not something I would do. And I definitely would say I'm against this. But I'm sure if Reddit was in charge, if Biden did the exact same thing, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever. And just go show you, they have no values, only teams. I don't really care for the drug war or how Trump's using it to push regime change in Venezuela. But, Reddit only seems to care about whatever the narrative is. They don't like regime change in Venezuela and a lot of other countries, but they were completely fine when the U.S. did regime change in Ukraine because the narrative said that was fine. It just goes to show you, they won't question whatever the official narrative is. They'll always justify it and will try and twist it to their advantage every single time. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Dalton Dryhouse on Instagram. The fear is the point. Hashtag alt-left pipeline. Hashtag FTT. Hashtag plan bounty. Hashtag fascism. Hashtag fear. And that's a post from Instagram.com posted by Mendamage13. I guess let's see what that is. Let's see. I don't know. I guess it's not. It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be taking a while to load. But yeah. I guess just go over the text then. Yeah, I guess, a lot of politics are fear-based, I would say, but I would say the left fear-mongers just as much, if not more, than the right does. They always want you to be afraid that you're going to lose all your rights any day now, and that Trump is literally Hitler, and is going to start putting people in camps any day now. Well, meanwhile, FDR actually put people in camps, and they downplay it. So, it just goes to show you these people have no consistent values, only teams. It's all about... people love to use fear as a tool to control people. But of course, Reddit, as I said, they only care when the right does it. When the left does it, it's entirely justified. And that's my thoughts on that issue. The next one. Trump says he will classify fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction from Bloomberg.com, posted by FastlyRuinous739, and that's cross-posted made to the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And they added, "Here we go again. Politicians are just like any other government worker, constantly creating problems to try to justify their job." And I'd agree with that. Fentanyl is kind of a problem, especially among people, among drug addicts. But ultimately, if you don't want to deal fentanyl, you don't have to get fentanyl, and you can just avoid it. And the government, I think Trump can market that's a noble intention, and I think in some aspects it is. But ultimately, I think the libertarian position is you got to be against the war on drugs. If people want to do fentanyl, they should be able to do fentanyl, even if it's deadly most of the time. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have U.S. military willing to attack quote-unquote designated terrorist organizations within America, General says from TheIntercept.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but I'm sure if it was the U.S. military saying, oh, we're going to go after Proud Boys, Free Percenters, Oath Keepers, Reddit would love it. But since the designated terrorist organizations are implied to be like something like Antifa, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. And it just goes to show you, Reddit, they care they care that the government's authoritarian currently, but when the Democrats take power again, they'll justify every instance of its authoritarian, all the authoritarian actions it does. And it just goes to show you these people have no consistent principles, only teams. Next, we have What the Fuck Is He Talking About, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the Newsom Massacre subreddit, and it says, I guess where it is, and it's a truth from Donald Trump, who proved Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock of them will be like nothing they have ever seen before, until such time as they return to the United States of America, of all the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from these stolen oil fields to finance themselves, drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. For the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization. Therefore, today I'm ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and criminals that the Maduro regime has sent into the United States during the weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, or other countries to rob, threaten, or harm our nation, and likewise will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, or any other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And yeah, personally, I don't really think that's that good. But, ultimately, if the president wants to justify a blockade on Venezuela for whatever reasons they want to justify, that's they ultimately are the commander-in-chief of the military, so they can justify doing whatever they pretty much want to. And oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. I do remember that the Iraq War was pretty damaging to Trump's party, the Republican Party, back during the W years, but ultimately, ultimately, I don't know if we'll get much more than this. I don't think it's gonna get boots on the ground because of how damaging the Iraq War was to the Republican Party in regards to boots on the ground. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. I definitely don't care that he's escalating tensions with Venezuela, though. I think the main, there's tons of reasons that he's doing it. I think there's, he wants the Venezuela's oil. He wants to distract from Epstein/Israel. He wants, the U.S. military always has to be pretty much bombing or drone striking somewhere. So, ultimately, I don't really care for it, but ultimately the government has the legal monopoly and needs to force justify doing whatever they feel like. Next we have Trump says tariffs have brought in $18 trillion. That's impossible, from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, I would agree with that. Tariffs are just a tax on imported goods, and the libertarian position should be anti-taxation. If you want to pay any voluntary taxation, including tariffs, you should be able to, but you shouldn't be forced to pay them if you don't want to. And the Trump protectionist argument is, they're going to encourage people to buy local. Well, I would say the libertarian position is, if you a truly free market means if you want to buy local, you should be able to buy local. But if you want to buy foreign, you should be able to buy foreign as well without any additional taxes or tariffs getting in your way. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Donald Trump's chief of staff makes huge Jeffrey Epstein files admission from Yahoo.com, posted by The Way to Beauty. And yeah, personally, it seems like the Epstein files are on the back burner currently for all the Venezuela stuff. But ultimately, as I said, they can only really be underwhelming at this point. And of course, Reddit only cares about them because Donald Trump's in the Epstein files. Any other rich and powerful people in the Epstein files, they don't care about. Like with the Trump worshippers, the Trump detractors only have all politics revolve around the orange man. And that's why I personally don't care for Trump worship syndrome or Trump derangement syndrome. I think they're both very bad things. You should have more values than whatever Donald Trump is for or against. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Senators freeze Coast Guard Admiral's promotion over swastika news policy from WashingtonPost.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And Yeah, I personally, I don't really, if they want to freeze their promotion for any reason whatsoever, they can justify that. But ultimately, maybe the president will override that, and ultimately, people are going to justify what they justify, regardless of the system of government in place. So if they don't want to give a promotion, that's fine. But ultimately, it comes down to what people are going to justify. And a lot of people are going to defer to what the president has to say. Maybe Trump will override the Senate and promote him anyway. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. Next, we have Libertarians should never advocate for state power. A message to Dave Smith and Bordertarians from agorisnexus.com, posted by Narco Federation. That's a cross post from the Agorism subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position on borders is that, if people want to make a border, that's fine, but having a state controlled border, like having a state controlled anything, is going to be inherently prone to corruption and government abuse. I think if people want to live in like a gay community and have private security and control like a border on their own, I think that's fine. But I think having a national border, unless it's under private control, is a recipe for state authoritarianism, just like anything else that the state controls. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Thomas Massey speaks out against Trump's antics towards Venezuela from posted by Donald T, and that's cross-post from the Thomas Massey subreddit, and that looks like a YouTube video from Forbes Breaking News. Breaking news: GOP, and that's what it is. Breaking news: GOP Thomas Massey comes out swinging against Trump's threats towards Venezuela. And yeah, personally, I would agree with Massey there. We shouldn't be going to war in Venezuela, like we shouldn't have gone to war in Iraq or Afghanistan or pretty much any other country you can think of. But, ultimately the government's going to justify doing whatever it wants to justify, especially when it comes to sending military wherever it wants to. And ultimately, I don't really care for the Maduro regime, but, it's not the U.S.'s job to overthrow it. It's the job of the Venezuelan people, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump said his tariffs would reduce the trade deficit and bring back manufacturing. Here's what the data show from Reason.com, posted by Johnny Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think they reduced the trade deficit or brought back manufacturing. I think they just made foreign goods more expensive. I think there might have been some good intentions for them, but ultimately, I don't think they're really going to work out too well in the long term. Just like they didn't back for the Smoot-Hawley tariff back in the 1930s or the tariff of abominations back in the 1830s. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have a book on how to achieve workplace democracy for militant unions, for posted by Goram Person 777, and that's a cross post from the Union subreddit. And that looks like a book called Swedish Syndicalism: An Outline of Its Ideology and Practice by Rasmus Hasbaka. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position on unions is, if people want to have unions, they should be able to have unions. But if the people running the show don't like it, they should be able to voice that. Ultimately, the libertarian position is, if you want to have unions and the company's okay with it, that's fine. But ultimately, it does come down to what the company wants first and foremost. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Unions are just kind of another form of collectivism. I would say the companies as a whole are a form of collectivism, I would say, but unions in particular, I think that's important to note from a libertarian perspective as well, since libertarians care so much about individualism rather than collectivism. Next, we have Venezuela's Maduro says Trump's comments on land and oil reveal his true motives from CNN.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, everyone but MAGA understands the true motives. And I would agree with that. Trump really just wants regime change mostly for oil reasons. I would say that's probably one of the biggest reasons. But the regime change is going to happen regardless of which branch of the new party's in power. Just look at Libya under Obama. Reddit. But Reddit only cares about Venezuela currently because it's the orange man's doing it. I'm sure if Biden was doing it, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever. Just kind of like how Reddit thought that funding Ukraine was the greatest thing ever because Biden was the one doing it, even though Ukraine is pretty much a U.S. puppet state currently, and that's very much the outcome of regime change, if it would happen to Venezuela as well. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Republicans always find a way to cheat, posted by Donald Key, and that's crossing from the Economic Collapse subreddit, and that looks like a Blue Sky post from Left for a Better World, who posted, House Republicans resort to shenanigans to kill ACA bill. The discharge petition got enough signatures to force a vote, but Republicans had never shook up their sleeve. When the bill came up, they prematurely closed voting, causing the bill to fail 204 to 203 and denying 26 members their vote. And yeah, I personally wouldn't care for that, but Reddit, Reddit thinks this is the greatest thing ever when the Texas Democrats leave their state government positions to go out of state, so they can't vote. So the the Texas House and Senate can't vote on their gerrymandered maps. But so, ultimately, people want to justify what they justify, that's on them. I personally think this it just goes to show you that, we shouldn't have voting or forced collectivism at all, especially when people are going to turn to childish shit like early closing voting or leaving the state entirely to justify not finishing the vote. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And yeah, let's see if there's anything new. So it looks like there's nothing new posted since then. So I think we're gonna wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.